evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Steve Rice. I'm the chairman of the Planning and Zoning Commission. I'd like to welcome you this evening. I'm now calling the meeting to order for April the 8th, 2025. We have a short agenda this evening, but for those of you that are visiting, make sure that you sign the clipboard in the back of the table so we have a record of your attendance. Before we get started on the agenda this evening, I'll introduce the folks to you at the table up here. To your left is Jason Bell. Our legal counsel is filling in for Matt Hess tonight. He's not a voting member. We have Ken Dozer, myself, and Maurice Young that are voting members for the Planning Commission. We have two that are not here. And then we have Marty Fulkerson, our representative from the City Council. He's not a voting member. At the podium is Joe Reverman, the head of our planning department, and in the back is Madeline Drake, and also Aaron Hawkins, their planners. Again, thank you for being here this evening. The first item of business is the approval of minutes for the March 25th, 2025 meeting. Commissioners, you've had a chance to get those in advance. I'll entertain any changes or motion to approve.
Motion to approve the March 25th minutes.
Okay, we have a motion to hear a second. We have a motion made and a second. Any question on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Let the record show the vote was 3-0. The next item of business is the continuation of public hearing 2025 PC07 residential zoning text amendments. This is a continuation of that public hearing. On the board there will be a listing of the order that will handle this evening, even though we started it earlier, and then we're going to play a little recording to let you know the order of the proceedings this evening.
This evening's agenda includes one or more public hearings for a zoning map or text amendment. Because this is a public hearing, it is being recorded. The following procedure must be followed so everyone has an opportunity to be heard. Each public hearing will begin with the chairperson announcing the request and opening that public hearing. Staff will present an analysis of the request and a recommendation. The commission members may ask questions of staff. The applicant or a representative will present the request and any information he or she deems relevant. The commission members may ask questions of the applicant or representative. Anyone else in favor of the request will be allowed to speak next. Then, anyone in opposition to the request will be allowed to speak. Anyone who does not want to speak in favor or in opposition, but wants to ask questions, may do so last. After everyone has voiced their opinion or asked questions, the applicant or representative will be allowed to return to the podium to address any issues that were raised and answer any questions. When all comments have been made and questions answered, the public comment period will be closed and the commission will deliberate. No additional comments can be made by anyone in the audience unless it is in response to a question from the commission. After completing its deliberation, the commission will take action. It has the option of tabling the request to allow time to gather additional information. However, in most cases, the commission will make a recommendation to either approve or deny the request. The recommendation will be forwarded to the City Council, which will make the final decision. That decision is based on the record of the hearing held here tonight. The City Council will not take additional testimony, and it is not appropriate for anyone to discuss a public hearing request with the mayor or City Council members. Your participation is important to the decision.
I can finish it. The information we're taking this evening, you want to try it or not?
The dialogue between the applicated period unless in response to a question from the commission. Anyone who thinks they may speak during the public hearing, even if it is only to ask a question, must take an oath. If a large number of people are in attendance, the chairperson has the right to limit the amount of time each speaker is allotted. The chairperson may also limit testimony that is determined to be irrelevant to the request or is repetitious. Your attendance at this hearing is appreciated. If you have not done so, please sign the register.
Does anybody have any questions over the proceedings that we're going to follow this evening? I'll now call on my legal counsel to swear you in if you're planning to make any kind of question or testimony.
Please raise your right hand. Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to staff.
Joe Redmond,
Okay, so I'm gonna go over the presentation again. I'm gonna go over it a little bit more briefly than I did last time because we went over this in a little bit more detail 2 weeks ago on March 25th. But for those who aren't here, I'll kind of go over it and then discuss a little bit about what the conversation was at the previous meeting. I did want to note the plan that we talked about, this is up to the commission of course, but was to have more discussion today, but have another tabling or continuance of this discussion because Commissioners Soularette and McCrary are not here today. They did have some questions and comments at the last hearing. I do believe they were wanting to be a part of more discussion on this, so I think we kind of agreed to have more discussion today and continue this, and we can discuss about a little bit later what meeting that would go to. On the presentation, again, just a brief version of what we discussed last time. So about a year ago or so, we talked about needing to update our residential development standards to kind of, number one, align with our comprehensive plan. So our zoning ordinance is kind of an implementation ordinance for our comprehensive plan for how we want our city to grow and guide that development for the next 20 years. That was adopted around 2020, so it's a 20-year horizon plan to 2040. So our zoning ordinance has not been updated very much since that time. A lot has changed since that time as well, not just with growth in the last 4 or 5 years, but with the residential market in the last 15 or 20 years as well too. So, and our zoning ordinance, especially for residential standards, is over 20 years older. So for the most part, barring any minor changes, we collectively felt that it was a good time to update our zoning development standards to fall more in line with the market demand for residential development in the city, as well as falling more in line with our newish comprehensive plan that was adopted in 2020. And so some of those market demands that we've seen in recent years, well, of course, we've seen a lot more multifamily units being developed, but we've also seen a demand for smaller residential lots for single-family houses, smaller yards, smaller side yard setbacks, and things of those nature that our zoning code doesn't necessarily deal very well with the older standards that we have. So, and also just promoting more housing opportunities and a variety of housing to kind of help that supply and demand to help with affordability of housing in general as much as we can. And we talked a little bit about there's only so much that zoning and development standards can help with as far as housing affordability. There are certain things that we can do to encourage more supply of housing to meet that demand, which can then kind of help with at least a little bit with the affordability of housing across the board. And I won't go too much into this, but of course, everything we adopt needs to comply with the goals and objectives of our comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is kind of set into a list of goals and objectives. Several of them apply to residential development and housing, land use. And then there's a list of action items within each goal and objective for how we can achieve those goals. And so we'll just kind of go through these really quickly. So goal 1 is related to land use and development. Goal 8, there's several objectives in that one because it's related to housing. And I won't go through those, but we discussed these a little bit. There's goal 9 is relative to downtown. That has more to do than just housing, of course, but there is a housing objective related to downtown and trying to encourage mixed-use developments in our downtown area, which includes housing. And our comprehensive plan generally separates our residential developments into suburban residential, which would be further away from our city core, our urban residential, and high-density residential closer to our residential core, and then mixed-use areas. To start this process, we always try to involve the community, so we developed a focus group meeting, which we had on July 17th, and we had a fairly large group of commissioners, planning staff, developers, builders, real estate agents, and the like, and engineers, people who have been designing residential developments and Some of the feedback we gained from them really fell in line with some of our goals and objectives from the comprehensive plan, as well as kind of what we thought we knew already. But there's just been more of a demand recently in the last 15 years or so for smaller lot sizes, smaller yards to take care of. Obviously a need for affordable housing, and this goes all across the country. And again, we talked about how zoning is just a small part of that, but we can, zoning can, at least in some way, help with the supply of additional housing in general, which can have some effect on increasing housing prices across the board. The ability to build a variety of housing types within neighborhoods, housing affordability in the market, which we kind of touched on. It was noted, just to kind of brag on all this a little bit, that the development process in Newtown works well. That wasn't something that the planning staff mentioned or the planning commissioner. That was something from the outside people in the meeting mentioned. That we do have a good process here in Newtown, and very supportive, and works pretty well. All the agencies involved in that process. A need for mixed-use developments and neighborhood commercial, and flexibility of housing types and densities. That kind of goes hand in hand with mixed-use developments, and having that variety of residential and non-residential uses within neighborhoods. And that kind of increases walkability of neighborhoods and develops communities more so than just subdivisions. So some of the goals that we set for this update before we really got into it, of course, again, always trying to align everything with the comprehensive plan, align the zoning code with current market demand, provide flexibility within the zoning districts, reduce the need for unnecessary rezonings, incentivize infill and redevelopment closer to our urban core, and create new housing types to increase supply. And just to touch on that, reduce need for unnecessary rezonings. One thing we talked about at the last meeting was just the unnecessary rezonings that we've seen a few times in recent years are situations where somebody asked for a zoning change, essentially to have smaller yards, like smaller setbacks, smaller side yard setbacks, or smaller lot frontages. So each zoning district has a minimum lot frontage that fronts on a public street. So we've had a couple of rezonings so that people could reduce that front yard width. The resulting subdivision or development didn't actually increase the density that was allowed on that property before the rezoning. So you could kind of look at that as, if we had that additional flexibility within the zoning districts, they wouldn't necessarily have needed that rezoning because they weren't really trying to increase density, just reduce something like a side yard setback or a lot width. And then kind of getting into some of the proposed amendments. One of the things that we're proposing with this one is to eliminate the family definition. That's something a lot of jurisdictions are doing across the country because it's kind of seen as potentially discriminatory to regulate who lives within a house or within a dwelling unit. And it's not something that we do anyway. We can't come to your house and say, you're living with 3 other guys and you're not related to each other, so you can't live in this house. As long as you're living as a housekeeping unit and you're living under one dwelling unit, there's no reason that you can't live there with people that are not related to you by blood, marriage, or adoption. So that's not something we can do anyway, so there's really no point in having a definition of family that requires you to be related in some sort in order to live in the same house. So we're trying to eliminate that family definition from the code and just get it back to just looking at dwelling units and how many dwelling units are on an acre plans. We're adding a definition for accessory dwelling unit, and we're adding that to the different residential zoning districts. So we're proposing to add accessory dwelling units as a permitted use within all residential zoning districts. We can talk a little bit more about that if we need to. Recovery residence is a new definition that was introduced by the state last year. Elizabethtown was the first city in the Commonwealth to adopt recovery residence ordinance and enforcement of that. So that state ordinance basically allows local jurisdictions to enforce new state standards that were adopted by Frankfurt in So we're just trying to keep up with the times and the state standards and state licensing requirements. So we're just adding that new term in the code, but it's not effectively changing how or where those types of uses are permitted. And then introducing some new development types. So we talked a little bit more about trying to provide that variety and flexibility within zoning districts. As long as someone is doing something innovative and providing a development type that fits in with the character of the neighborhood. So we're introducing conservation developments, cottage court and townhouse developments into the code. I won't go into this, but we're proposing to adjust on some of the zoning districts the minimum lot width and the lot area to come into compliance with, again, the comprehensive plan and the new market domain that we're seeing. The biggest change, which is not a big plan, is that R2 zoning district that you see. The existing R2 zoning district allows 5 units per acre, and that's a suburban zoning district by definition of the comprehensive plan, which says that suburban zoning districts go up to 6 dwelling units per acre. So we're just adjusting that 5 to a 6 to comply with the comprehensive plan that we have. And then reducing some side yard setbacks for our urban zoning districts, which are R3 through R6, from 10 feet to 5 feet. And that mainly has the biggest difference on that 10 feet to 5 feet really has more to do with how we handle drainage within developments. But we've worked through some of those with questions with engineers that work on subdivision level plans, as well as our stormwater director, Rita Davis. And there's really no concerns with them about how to handle that, as long as we know that we need to address some of these things in a little bit more detail at the subdivision level and not worry about them once houses are starting to be built. So, but that is also something that the market demand that we're seeing, a lot of newer subdivisions are wanting to be developed with smaller side yard setbacks and smaller yards in general. So that's also trying to kind of adjust for the new market demand that we're seeing. We looked I'll just say real quick, we looked at a couple of subdivisions as examples. R2 and R4 are some of our single-family subdivisions, are the most common zoning districts for single-family subdivisions. So we looked at a couple of subdivisions and how those were developed. On R2, you can see that was developed at 4.58 lots per acre, pretty close to that maximum 5 dwelling units per acre. And then what we're proposing to do is reduce that lot width and increase the maximum density from 5 to 6 to comply with the comprehensive plan. And then the R4 subdivision, we looked at Magnolia Gardens, which R4 allows up to 10 dwelling units per acre. And Magnolia Gardens, they did a fairly decent job with the minimum lot width, which is 60-foot width. Most of their lots were around 65 feet width, but they were only able to get to 3.88 lots per acre, nowhere near that maximum 10 dwelling units per acre that's allowed in R4. And we propose to reduce that minimum lot width and again reduce the side yard setback on that. And then the additional development options, I won't go into these in great detail either, but we talked about allowing residential and commercial zoning districts. So one of our goals is to create more housing opportunities and more opportunities for mixed-use developments. Well, our commercial zoning districts already allow the commercial uses, and it's fairly common for residential uses to be allowed within commercial zoning districts. And just adding that use within commercial zoning districts, just right away, easily creates more opportunity for residential developments within our community and an opportunity for mixed-use developments. And adding residential into existing commercial areas is typically very compatible. Going the opposite way is a little bit more difficult, but when you have a higher density and intensity of uses in these commercial areas, it's relatively easy to incorporate residential uses into those commercial zoning districts in a way that's compatible and it's not intruding on other neighborhoods. We're adding a planned development district, which is ones up in Louisville. Those are what developers call planned communities, where they have a lot of flexibility in where they put things, but there are a high level of design standards for streetscapes and building designs and open space and those types of things. And so there's not a whole lot of developers that do that type of work. The ones that do like to have that high level of flexibility, and it still requires a rezoning where the planning commission and city council have the ability to ensure that it's going to be a high quality development while giving that developer a greater degree of flexibility in what they develop and how they design it. Conservation developments, I'll get into cottage court development, townhouse development, and accessory dwelling unit. Again, I kind of covered this residential and commercial zoning districts. The planned developments I covered a little bit. It's basically just a new zoning district, so it requires a rezoning. It has to go through that process, and it basically requires the application to provide a master plan for approximately where different types of uses are going to be provided, and then provide a list of amenities and design features that will give the commission and city council a good idea of what that development is going to look like as far as the streetscape, building design, open space, amenities, things like that, and then allow the developer then to go in and kind of massage that a little bit. As long as they get the quality of development, they can kind of go in after the fact and move things around as necessary. And I talked about, we just looked at Norfolk, Virginia as one of our examples that we looked at. I won't go into that. But again, the zoning district that's proposed, it includes procedures, which is, like I said, generally just requires a zoning change, and a master plan, and requires a high level of design details and development guidelines that are created by the developer, but do require approval by the commission and city council. Conservation development is an interesting one. This is something we're proposing for the suburban zoning district, so this would be something kind of at the edge of the city. And this allows developers to, I think some people call it like a transfer of development rights essentially. But essentially, if you preserve some open space on the property, it allows you to condense the development into a smaller area. And the benefits of that is it allows greater buffers adjacent to existing developments. That also requires less infrastructure, so less roads, less sewers, less utility lines, et cetera. So it has a smaller impact on the environment, essentially. And that's not just good for the developer, that's also good for the city and for the utilities, because if you think about the roads and sewers and infrastructure, once those things are installed by the developer, they turn over to the responsibility of the city or Hardin County Water or NOLAN, or whoever it may be. So if there's fewer feet or fewer square feet of that infrastructure that is installed, that's less infrastructure to be maintained by the city or utilities. So it's cheaper for the city as well as if they can typically provide that, again, that extra buffer to adjacent properties and protection of natural features on site. So a lot of times developers will use this to preserve a stream or a stand of trees or steep slopes or something on the property that would be difficult to develop, and allows them to have a more compact development with less impact on adjacent properties without going through a zoning change. A cottage court development is something more for an urban area. So this is basically like a courtyard development where you have a group of houses that are developed on an inward-facing courtyard, a pedestrian courtyard. So this is just another option that gives developers an option to do something a little bit different without going through a zoning change, but it doesn't increase the density that's allowed by that zoning district. So it allows you greater flexibility as long as you meet these certain design standards that the cottage court development standards provide for the zoning ordinance. Same thing with townhouse development. I think most people know that townhouse development row houses essentially. Essentially just gives that greater flexibility as long as you meet these certain design standards that are in the zoning ordinance. It reduces some of the other standards that might prevent someone from being a little bit more creative on that lot. But again, it still does not allow them to increase the density that's required within that zoning district. Accessory dwelling units, again, this is something that's pretty common nowadays, but it is, an accessory dwelling unit can be something that's where a garage is either converted to a dwelling unit, a small dwelling unit, or you put the upper story of a garage, convert that into a dwelling unit, or it could be something within a house itself, where you have a separate section of the house that is a separate dwelling unit. It does have to be accessory, which means it has to be smaller than the principal house that's on the lot. And there's some certain standards, so it has to essentially look like the house, a single-family house that's on there. So you can't have, it wouldn't be a duplex, would not constitute an accessory dwelling unit. It would have to be something that looks like it's a single-family house, and looking from the street, you would not be able to tell that there's a smaller dwelling unit somewhere on that site. It just requires one additional parking space on there. But that's proposed to be allowed in every residential zoning district now. And there's just a picture of, there's different options of how that might work. It might be something within the existing principal house or something in the garage. Community gardens, we're just adding that use in there. And there's some standards for how that's done, but that just gives neighborhoods and communities the ability, if they want to come together and have a community garden in their neighborhood, it just essentially just makes that. Home occupations, I just mentioned that there's no changes to that, we just relocated where that was in the ordinance. Same with the conditional use permits, we just added a new section with general standards for conditional use permits. And then short-term rentals is what we had the most discussion on at the last meeting. And this was, one thing that was pointed out was the difference between an owner-occupied short-term rental and a non-owner-occupied short-term rental. We are treating those differently, as do most zoning ordinances. So an owner-occupied short-term rental is something that's currently allowed in our zoning ordinance today. In these zoning districts, we just moved the standards around, but they're permitted in all the residential zoning districts. So if you own your house, you are allowed to rent out your house on a daily basis for a maximum of 10 nights per year. That is something we're not changing. What we're proposing to change is the non-owner occupied short-term rentals. Right now, those are not allowed at all in any of the single-family zoning districts. We do know that there are several of these around the city. We do know that they're difficult to enforce. You can get on Airbnb and see a lot of these listings. They don't necessarily provide addresses. And even if you can find the address, you can't just cite somebody for advertising their house on Airbnb. You have to actually catch them in the act of renting it out, and that's a little bit more complicated. What we found and what a lot of cities have found is that these non-owner occupied short-term rentals typically, more times than not, are not a nuisance in the neighborhood. The one thing we did want to avoid in this ordinance was allowing them to be grouped together on the street so that the majority of the street was non-owner occupied short-term rentals. Because a non-owner occupied short-term rental is more akin to a hotel than it is a single-family house. So we wanted to avoid a situation where you had a street that had an abundance of these type of hotel uses as opposed to residential uses that the street may be zoned for. So what we proposed was to provide a 600-foot separation between non-owner occupied short-term rentals. Part of the discussion we had last time was that may not work in every situation, and there may be situations where that's not appropriate. We did add some language in this version that says the Board of Zoning Adjustment or Planning Commission can waive that standard. But that would be something that they would do during approval of a conditional use permit. And so, but we still think that some type of separation between these non-owner occupied short-term rentals would be appropriate. And then I did provide you a summary of some of the things we talked about. And I'll go over those short-term rentals first from the last meeting. And it was noted last time that non-owner occupied short-term rentals were allowed with approval of the CUP in the urban zoning districts, R3 through R6, but it was questioned why they were not allowed in R1 or R2. That's something we can change. The thought that I had when I put that in there was that this would be something more appropriate for the urban areas. If we want to allow them in suburban areas as well, I don't think that's necessarily a problem. We can certainly add that, so that might just be something we want to consider. And then it was stated by someone that short-term rentals should be allowed in accessory dwelling units, especially in urban zoning districts. The proposal we have in front of us does permit ADUs on lots with an owner-occupied short-term rental, but it does restrict an accessory dwelling unit on lots with a non-owner-occupied short-term rental. So I know that can kind of get confusing, but we can try to parse that out if we think there's some questions on that. But a possible solution would just be to allow the Board of Zoning Adjustment or Planning Commission to make that decision when they're looking at a conditional use permit for that type of use. And then again, there was questions about the 600-foot separation. I did admit there was not anything necessarily magical about that 600-foot proposal, other than most city blocks and most cities are around 500 to 600 feet. So the idea was to allow one of those within each city block. There's nothing that says that that's the perfect idea or that's the best idea. But again, the board or the planning commission would have the ability to waive that if they thought it was appropriate with certain requests, because they would require that special approval before they could operate. And then additional language was added, again, like I said, just to make sure that it's understood that the board or commission can waive that requirement. There was a little bit of discussion on conservation and development of open space, and accessory dwelling units and parking, which we can discuss further. But again, I know there's a lot to go through on that, and we can talk about as much of that tonight as you'd like, but I'll just leave it there for now and just kind of turn it over for questions or for anybody else to make a presentation or ask additional questions.
Commissioners, do you have any questions? After hearing this, you weren't here last time. Do you have any questions?
You know, will HOAs have to fall underneath these new zoning laws?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that, but I mean, in what way? Maybe can you explain?
Well, if a HOA doesn't allow short-term rentals,
So yeah,
but then we have this, do they have to fall?
so HOAs can be more, their deed restrictions can be more restrictive than the zoning regulations, but it cannot be less restrictive. So yes, homeowners associations would have to comply with our zoning ordinance, but they can make their rules more restrictive.
And who enforces those?
The homeowners association would be a private matter. So the city or the planning commission would not get involved in those type of restrictions.
Joe, in how many situations with the 600 feet, how many situations that you all would be aware of that we would have more than one currently in that? And then how would you choose which one would get to stay? How does the commission fairly choose?
Yeah, I didn't look at how many would fall under that, but I imagine there would be at least half a dozen or so that might come through. How we would choose would be that the commission, most of them would go to the Board of Zoning Adjustment, and the board could waive that 600-foot requirement for any one that they chose. They could waive all of them or none of them, but that would be a choice that they would make when the application is brought before them with that waiver
then once that decision is made, no others would be allowed on that street?
Unless the board waives that standard.
Correct.
So as far as the first one to get approved, I mean, that would usually be a first come, first served basis. I mean, in my mind, it should be considered what, how long some of these short-term rentals have been operating and whether or not they have substantive complaints filed against that property. But, I mean, that would be something for the board to consider when they get that application waiver request.
So, speaking of complaints, how often are complaints filed at this point? What are you aware of?
With our office, very, very little. I mean, it's probably not more than 1 or 2 a year that we get complaints on short-term rentals. And typically that's because there's a noise complaint. And honestly, at least once or twice, the complaint has just been that somebody knows they're illegal, so they're just calling it in, even if there was no nuisance.
Talk. You all get a chance to. Sorry.
My first time.
The 600 feet thing, we talked about this at the last meeting too, but I'm wrestling with the fairness of that. If Jason happens to own a house and I own a house 400 feet down the street, and by virtue of the fact that he applied first, and I'm wrestling with how that is fair, because you mentioned that we're going to measure based on complaints and this and that and the other as to who would be, potentially the most justified approval there.
Yeah. Couple responses on that is, number one, they're both illegal right now. So they both are operating illegal today.
I understand. We never, Airbnb is a relatively new, kind of what you call it, medical procedures. It's a relatively new idea, branded that way, as compared to, renting a hotel or whatnot. But, the other thing, and I agree with what you said a while ago, that I think we likely need to look at R1 and R2. If you're going to require a conditional use permit, I don't see why we've tried to delineate between residential zoning. Personally, if we're going to go to the point that it's got to have, there's got to be an application for that permit anyway, the majority of the Airbnbs that I'm aware of are going to be in all likelihood R1 or R2 districts. That's where your houses are in.
Oh, I would have said R4.
Really?
R2. The majority of subdivisions that we have, or some majority of single-family housing we have is either an R2 or R4. I would have guessed the majority of short-term rentals are probably in R4 because they're closer to the city.
Well, but, this gentleman here the other night, when you gave testimony, you were talking about cost and then, being able to justify the purchase. And if you do it as a 12-month, if I wanted to rent from you, my family will live there, you can't charge enough rent to be able to justify. And I think that's a byproduct too, kind of like what we're talking about with reducing lot sizes, so these developers can get more lots in a subdivision to recoup their costs. It's a similar situation when you're talking about if I want to be in an investment property, game. It may not be, what's the word I'm looking for here? It may be cost prohibitive to try to do it as a long-term rental versus a short-term rental. And I personally would think we probably get more complaints on your long-term rental at the city, noise, garbage, pets, et cetera, than we do on the Airbnb. But I don't know that to be fact. I'm going to ask that question if you.
I mean, I don't have data, but yeah, I would say you're probably correct. But a couple things to consider too, just as far as like the first come, first served basis. That would apply in a multitude of situations for any type of land use request, I guess. The second part of that is, we're considering non-owner occupied short-term rental a commercial use. So we're allowing a non-residential use in a residential zoning district with this ordinance proposal. So that's one thing we want to make to a hotel than it is to a residence, because you're allowing people to stay there on a nightly basis. So I mean, I think we need to be careful on how many of these we allow on a residential street. So I think there needs to be some sort of control and measure on what the density of these non-owner occupied units are going to be.
I guess I would agree with what you're saying, because I wouldn't want it to be, if you've got 5 houses on a block and you've got 4 of them and you're the only one in the middle, I think to me that controls the situation by limiting, whether you do 300 or you do 600, I think we've got to put some kind of limitation on there. Otherwise, we have a whole street of hotel, basically. I don't know what you guys think about that or not.
You know, from the standpoint of where I sit is that I've never gotten a complaint on an Airbnb short-term rental except in a situation where it was a personal issue that they didn't get the opportunity to manage one. And so then they went on a terror to complain about everybody. And one of the things that I found is that every one of these are better shape than a traditional rental, a 12-month. And that is due to the fact that when you get as a former landlord owner, you've got a tenant in there for 12 months that's tearing up the property and doing whatever. And that eviction process is long. And they can destroy your asset before you ever get them out of there. But an Airbnb or short-term rental, they've got to keep it up. Because if you don't, they're not going to get rentals from it. I think we got to manage it right. I don't think anybody wants a full street of them. You know, my one thing is that, of course, you know, from where we sit too, I believe that they are subject to the room tax. And through Kentucky League of Cities, we've been fighting with Airbnb and trying to get legislation changed because I think because they serve the same purpose as a hotel room would. And so I think they're subject to it. Airbnb would love to collect it and not pay it, but that's another issue beside what we're doing unless we can tie it into this. That if the condition is used for that, that room tax has to be submitted part of just a regular room tax, transient room tax here.
So keep in mind, I mean, this proposal is making them legal. So right now, they're not allowed pretty much anywhere. So we're progressing to make them legal. And then the other thing to keep in mind is some people would say if you allow too many non-owner occupied short-term rentals, it has the effect to degrade the housing market because you're taking more units off the market. I'm not saying I agree with that. But
I think the value's going up. I can show you all that.
Which
It's
raises
not
housing
really values at all. The supply is the supply. If you want to control it, you got to own it, right? And so I can't dictate that unless I own it, right? And same thing, if you choose the 12-month traditional, that's your choice as a business owner. If you choose to do the Airbnb, the short term, the city benefits because the property value goes up because all these are well kept. If they're not well kept, we're going to address those issues just like we would in a regular planning, through a regular planning.
Code enforcement.
Code enforcement, yeah, absolutely, thank you. So, yeah.
And I agree with you. I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm kind of playing a little bit of devil's advocate too when you talk about those housing prices going up. That's one thing we're trying to control somewhat is.
If you want to control that, let's build workforce housing in this community. Let's quit talking about it and let's do it. And we as a city are horrible at that. Not you, not your department. We, as a city council, elected officials, we're horrible at that. You know, and I love the venue, the music venue, that's great. But we're all excited about $47 million and we got people who can't afford housing. Just saying. You get all the niceties when you can supply the basic demands of your citizens. That's my soapbox, sorry, Charlie, for a little bit.
Well, I hear what you're saying, Marty. I think we're taking the first bite of the apple here, though.
Yeah.
I think somewhere we've got to put some line in there, and we can always come back and adjust it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the other part of it. I mean, if we're gonna make this thing legal,
Right.
we gotta have a little bit of teeth in it. But, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but this is the first bite at it. So whether it's 600 or 300 or something,
Yeah.
I'd like to have more history, to be honest with you.
Right. Right.
On that. Any other questions, commissioners? Questions? Okay. Now we're going to turn it over to the audience if you have questions. That was presented. And by the way, housekeeping thing, when you ask a question, you have to go to the podium and state, I'm serious here, state your name and address for the record, please.
My name's Glenn Downs, 2523 Bridgestone. That's that one I got it. My wife Tracy and I, we own some Airbnbs. We pay a permit to have those. We pay the housing. Is that right?
We have a property account that we need to have implemented in our.
Okay, so when you guys are talking about this, we just do the Airbnbs, we don't do long-term due to the fact that things do get tore up. But when we have the Airbnb people come in, everybody's trying to build up downtown, guaranteed everybody comes to rent from us are going to all the restaurants to eat. So that's building the revenue of that. Of course, the city's getting our permit money and things like that. So we keep them all up just to make sure it's, because we want everybody to come stay with us. So I didn't know if it was going to be more of your grandfathered in, you'd already paid for your property permit or whatever like that, or it's going to be a fresh start of you have to start over to be accepted in, get an Airbnb permit, stuff like that. Because where some of our houses are, we have other people that also Airbnb, and we are really close within, well, we're really close up, two of them, 200 or 300 feet of each other. So when you were saying, if you had one, he has one, we're gonna flip a coin, or if he gets there first, do I lose out, or whatever. I think it's, the Airbnb, I think it's a good thing for the city part of it, because it brings people to come in, they're gonna see our town growing, and they're gonna buy our food and shop at our shops. It's just my take.
Okay. Mr. Downs, I'm gonna have staff, Joe, you wanna address, does the meter start over, or what happens in those situations? Can you answer, I think that was his question.
I mean, there wouldn't be any grandfathered in necessarily, assuming that the Airbnbs you have right now are not legal to begin with. So you can't grandfather something in that wasn't legal to begin with. But, so, I mean, so what we're doing is trying to make them legal and give a process to make them come into compliance with, so, I mean, that, you would have to come in for each one of those and ask for a conditional use permit, so.
Okay, well, we bought a permit.
Business license.
Not from the city.
We just have a business license.
Yeah.
All right, so that's-
Yeah.
And you're probably ahead of most people.
Yeah.
Good, you got a
So
business.
Mr.
we
Jones
have a
has a
business
question.
license, we do all of our taxes. They started out
Would you mind
as,
coming up and giving your name? Sorry. Name there.
yeah, I guess since I've been in this, my name is Tracy Downs. We have a business license, a property account, and we do everything legit. They were long-term rentals, but then we started doing short-term rental. So that's basically it in a nutshell. So, when they were long-term rentals, we had to go back in and revamp, and it was just a hot mess. So that's just kind of what happened. I like it better, short-term rentals. And we make more money, and our property doesn't get destroyed. So that's just my take on it.
Thank you. Mr. Dozie?
Joe, since we're talking about this distance thing, is it appropriate to look at different distances based on zoning? R1, R2 being a greater distance from one another versus R3, 4? And I'm not trying to overcomplicate it, but you have different densities per zone. So
I think it would
my
make-
point is, if in R6 you allow greater density than you do R1, so by virtue of the fact that you allow greater density there, would it make sense that it be a reduced distance between the units?
It would make sense to me. I've not looked into how we would do that or what the numbers would be.
Like you said, we're not really going to take, unless something changes, we're going to take a vote tonight, since it's a discussion more than anything else. So, if we're going to look at these changes and incorporate the short-term rental, I would be curious to know if that mechanism might be employed in other similar-sized communities, or if we even know if.
I'm not aware of one. I mean, I've looked at quite a few.
that may be overcomplicating it, but, you know, if you allow greater density in a higher, you know, R6 than you do R2, you know, the properties are gonna be in closer proximity to one another to begin with.
Well, another way you could do it though too, to Mr. Downs' point, is instead of having 600 feet, you could say having two within that 600 feet. They may be side by side, maybe a house apart, but you're not having 5 of them in a row. I guess that's my fear, is that, not that they're bad, it's just, if I'm the only one on the 6-house row that owns my house, and there's, the rest of them aren't, I won't know I care for it, but the point of it is, if you've got, like you said, we probably have situations around here in town where there's more than one on the street. So maybe that's something we could consider. So.
We don't regulate or zone if there are 6 rental houses next to one another that are
That's
6
your
hundred
long-term
total.
rentals.
But again, so in this proposal, we're considering the non-owner occupied a commercial use. So
Well,
a 30-day
so-
rental would be considered a
So
residential use.
if I'm a tenant renting a house, that's not owner occupied.
No, but if it's a 30-day lease, that's a residential use per our zoning ordinance. And we do not regulate anywhere whether or not somebody owns or rents. And that's probably the answer.
Let's not go that legal route.
Not probably.
Okay. Question?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
So Rachel Branningham, 159 Hollow Bridge Drive, here in Elizabethtown. So I own short-term rentals, and I probably run one of the biggest management of short-term rentals here. And so we collect the transient room tax, and we report that every single month, we pay that in. We're happy to do that. I kind of want to speak to Marty Fulkerson's point where, being in real estate as well, so homeowners, individuals are purchasing these properties where they have them in their long-term portfolio. We're identifying that they're a great location for tourism. And then we're going in and they're putting in tons of money to improve this property. So I actually disagree. One of my short-term rentals is next door to a long-term rental. The long-term rental currently has a couch in the front yard. It currently is a hoarder house. It currently is absolutely vile to the city of Elizabethtown. We've called and reported it, and of course, they move the couch to the backyard. The minute you guys leave, they put it back in the front yard. Whereas next door, my owners have invested over $300,000 to take this rundown piece of shit and turn it into a really beautiful property that is a benefit to the community, okay? In that home is hosted families that come and enjoy the downtown area. This is what they're looking for. As a mom with 2 little boys, I don't like hotels. I don't like to check my kid into a tiny little hotel room and try to find activities to keep them busy. I want a home where I can spread out the board games, I can go wash my laundry, I can enjoy the backyard. And so that's what we've created with all of these homes, that we have 509 5-star reviews on these properties. From the outdoors, just the landscaping, the yard maintenance. I mean, these are impeccably cared for properties. They are not thrown together, they're not jumped up. They have to be better than the person who owns their property next door, or what starts to happen. You start to get 4-star reviews, 3-star reviews, you stop getting bookings, then my owners can't afford to keep them anymore. Then they're having to turn them into a long-term rental or do something different. Keeping in mind they've already invested hundreds of thousands of dollars to make them perfect, beautiful, substantial, design-worthy. So they're actually raising property value in the downtown area. I would love to own a home with 4 short-term rentals on the same street because I know that those property owners are pouring tons of money into improving them and they're spending tons of money monthly maintaining that property. So every one of my owners has a landscaper, has a lawn care person, has someone cleaning it, has someone going in and replacing the furniture. There's no couches in the front yard, there's no pickup trucks parked off to the side. I mean, these are just impeccably cared for properties. So I just want to point out that I actually disagree with the fact that it lowers your property value in any way. Also, we have 24-hour care on these properties, right? Somebody is round the clock monitoring to make sure that there's no wild parties going on. We're shutting those parties down. We don't want our owners having a party at their property. Our owners don't want that. There's very strict rules and regulations. We report those issues to Airbnb, they can get evicted immediately. If I have a long-term resident, which I've affiliated over 300 long-term properties, that eviction process is lengthy, the house is absolutely destroyed, So that's the benefit of people who want to have something a little bit nicer and are willing to invest their money into it. And the only way to reimburse that amount of investment is through short-term rental. So I would really just ask you guys to consider the 600-foot distance. The families that utilize these are not a threat to a hotel because they don't want to be in a hotel. They want to be in a home. They're coming for, a lot of them are saying, hey, we're coming for, say, the Ripken experience. We're gonna be here for a week at a time. Our kids need space. We want to be able to come and go. We don't want to be checked in and out of the hotel. So we want to provide that as an opportunity. And by regulating with the 600-foot rule, there's only so much space in the downtown area, and there's really only so many roads and stuff that actually offer the benefit of having a property like this. Because one of the big things is what's surrounding the home. You can't be coming from another state and pull into a property next door to something rough, right? You want people to feel safe in that spot. So what we do is we go in and we buy this house and we make it feel comfortable and cozy and safe. So that 600-foot distance, it's really going to limit how many we can have. We're happy. I'm really grateful for actually making these legal because, of course, owning and renting these type of units, it's something that I really think is just a dated, back in the day, there wasn't something like this, right? I think this is a really needed asset to our community, and I don't think it's threatening hotels. I really want it to work with the city. I want it to be a benefit to the city. We're happy to get, the conditional use permit. We collect that tourism tax. We pay that in monthly. My team's working on it today, so we gotta get it in. So, those kind of things, but the 600-foot distance is just for example, we are investing in a piece of property. We're going to build a townhome that's already been approved by the city. The only way for me to ever make that work, for me financially, to keep those properties, is to have both doors as Airbnb, because the cost of construction is so high right now. So if I go and invest all that money, it's adding to the downtown area, it's creating housing opportunity, but then I can't afford to pay for it with a long-term rental. So I would just ask you guys to really consider that 600-foot distance. I understand the need to regulate short terms. I think having somebody who does, and I kind of understand the difference between the residential and commercial, not totally, because oftentimes I'll have a long-term rental that gets a person in there, and they're in there for 15 days or less, and I gotta be a victim because of some reason or the other. So how are they not the same? However, I can respect that, but the 600-foot distance, that's really going to inhibit the amount of properties that can be made available, and I disagree that it really is going to be a benefit to you. I've never seen, I drive by a lot of our short-term rentals, and if I see a dandelion in the front yard, I am calling my team saying, hey, we've got a dandelion problem. Hey, the trash cans haven't been pulled back to the road. Hey, we got to get the flag untethered. The flag has to be hanging and flying, right? It's not a situation where we're parking a tenant there. Some of my long-term rentals, we go in them maybe once a year, right? We access that door because the tenant won't allow us. These we are in every couple of days. We are in that front yard. We are pulling trash cans up. They're just they're manicured. They're a benefit. They're not something that should be looked at as something that I think needs to be, micromanaged or controlled. Obviously want them to be legal. I appreciate that move, but the 600-foot distance is just, it's really going to limit the amount of properties we can have. And here's the thing. It's only going to continue to raise property value because what's happening is as the city has more, the best rise to the top. Does that make sense? So if owners are not getting bookings because there's better properties, then the other ones are starting to go back to long-term. So when we had the big burst of Ford and everybody was like, we've got all these Ford guys, everybody ran into the short-term rental market and put their houses available with, cheap furniture and just kind of threw them together. All of those have turned back to long-term rentals because they weren't put together as this experience, this beautiful space. They were just kind of created. So I really feel like what's happening as we continue to allow them, only the best properties are going to continue to book. And some of those, not as well cared for properties, you're going to see them start to go back to long-term. So I think by regulating them too tightly, it's really just putting a bottleneck on the fact that, they really are a benefit. And so I'd ask you guys just to reconsider that 600-foot rule. So any questions for me, from the management side of things? Or?
I don't think so.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else that wishes to come forward and ask a question or make a presentation? Yes, sir.
Scott Even, 185 Eden Lane. I know I spoke quite a bit at the last meeting, so I won't do it this time, but I just wanted to reiterate a couple of things, and I think Rachel covered it very well in stating the concerns over short-term rentals. So, like I said, most of the other zoning regulations, I think it's a great asset to allow more development in the city, and reducing those restrictions, but restricting short-term rentals. I said the ones that I'm opposed to are the 154-076, which is on the EDU, so I just want to add that into the conversation on here, that ADUs are, like I said, a very big target of people that take care of and manage short-term rentals. If you say you're ADUs, and there's a lot of those around town, especially in the older communities, they used to build those a lot of times above garages, as you saw in the pictures, or behind those, or build a mother-in-law suite in a home. Those are targets for short-term rental people and long-term rental people for businesses. So if you, I don't think you should be put a limitation as well on the ADUs so that they can't be used for a short-term rental as well, because the proposed regulation is that if you have a long-term rental at home, you can't, if it has an ADU available, that you can't short-term rent that as well with that if it's not an occupied primary residence. So I think that restriction should be removed. That one was the 154-076. And then also on the short-term rental, 600-foot distance. Once again, one of the concerns that we talked about last time, that the 600 could be restricted. They talked about, well, one of the questions that Mr. Curry brought up as well was, is this really even a problem? Are we addressing something that's not a problem yet? I know there's been some concerns of that, but more around the recovery house use, because there has been some streets that have been taken over pretty much by recovery homes. But on short-term rentals, I don't see that as much. We'll see a few in an area, but I haven't ran into that. And as we talked about last time, the market is kind of correcting itself, as Rachel mentioned as well, and I mentioned last time that the numbers are going down actually for short-term rentals in the area, because the whole Ford business brought that in because they didn't have, a good spot for workers to go and house, so they were using a lot of the short-term rentals, so people were throwing together ones, and they would put literally cots in a room. They'd slap 3 or 4 cots in a room, and they were sleeping in there. I had a few call me and they'd say, hey, I've got, 6 people that are coming in electrician. I'd say, no, sorry, you can't use mine because I don't want them tearing up my house. If there was, 6 regular workers coming in, and I have a 2-bedroom house, and they're trying to cram them in, so I turned down a lot of rentals or kept my rates out for those. But you're seeing all those disappear now, either go back to long-term, or a lot of them are being sold on the market. There's several that have been listed and sold in recent days. As a realtor, I see that all the time as well. So you're seeing those go down. I just did a recent search on it, and if you went in and searched detail on Airbnb, depending on whether you put in one, which a lot of people don't even allow one night, they say only 1, 3, or 4 nights minimum, and that keeps parties and things like that from potentially happening. There was 117 that came up in E-Town. Now, of that 117, actually, about 60 of those were not E-Town. They come up just because, so people search E-Town, a lot of them will report, hey, we've got, a ton of these here. And a lot of them are Radcliffe, Shepherdsville, there's a lot of different towns. So actually the numbers are a lot smaller than when you just go out and do a quick search on that. And I know one time when I was searching that number, if you expand the scope and you add, a lot of those are in the county as well, not just city limits. So you even subtract the 60 off, and then some percentage of state town are in the city limits area as well. That number was well over 300 during the prime Ford time when that was going on. People were throwing them on the system left and right. So just like I said, that the problem, there may not be, when they were asking, is this really a problem? Is this really a booming number? It's really not as big as a lot of people think it is on short-term rentals. And yeah, there'll probably be more, and as Rachel mentioned, a lot of them are your nicer homes that are here, and you're seeing the ones that aren't changed because people aren't staying in those. So that's really all I have, is I just wanted to cover those 2 things. So for 600 feet, and maybe during that review, instead of saying only 600 feet on the street, that once people are doing a conditional use permit or something for those, when that's being looked at, you could say, well, how many do we have on the street? Because maybe it's a street that's pretty long and there's 80 houses on it, 6 isn't a bad number, but maybe if there's 7 houses on it, maybe 6 or 7 is a bad number. I don't know, but I think you take more of the exception and making that the rule would be a better approach to that, and that way it's not as cumbersome by putting that, because as mentioned, if you, last time, if you purchase a duplex and you want a short-term rental, you couldn't do that without restrictions. That's all.
Any questions of Mr. Eden? Thank you. Mr. Dozier has a question for you, Mr. Herbert.
Do we know what the county, Hardin County, is doing to regulate outside of our city limits?
Short-term rentals?
Yes.
I don't,
Nothing?
I don't know offhand.
Well, I would be curious,
I don't think they're doing anything.
I haven't heard if they're doing anything, but I'm just curious if we put this regulation in, is it going to be more or less restrictive than what the county doing? If they're doing nothing, obviously it'll be more restrictive.
Yeah. I would dare say that they're not doing anything, so you know.
I don't think so, I just didn't look at it.
That's what happened with some of these sober living homes, when we did our regulations, when we passed our ordinances, they moved out, and the county had to react to that.
But, I know we keep talking about just this out of about 5,000 things that are in the text document. But if we're getting no complaints, they are operational now. I'm just curious if we're overthinking how restrictive we want this to be.
You know, and I'll say this too, because I know everybody that's in this room. The good actors are here.
They're always
The ones that have the problem, they're here. And you're right,
Yeah.
those are the ones that always come. And so the difficult task is, how do you not punish the good actors, but you bring the others up? That's always kind of a balance.
Easier said than done.
Yes,
And wouldn't that be the conditional use permit, the process that you go through for that?
I think that would help. Yes.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Any other questions?
What some cities have done is put a condition with the conditional use permit that says if you have so many substantiated complaints, that the board can revoke the conditional use permit. And what that does, it doesn't say that if you get complaints that you're going to be revoked. It has to be substantiated by staff or the police department.
Because to Marty's point a while ago, the person that you talked about that complaint was not complaining because of the Airbnb, as you said, they were complaining that they didn't get to act as.
Right. The garbage can wasn't moved back when they thought it should be.
Or the kids
Yeah,
playing in the
that's-
street.
that's
Yeah,
not-
or the kids were playing
baseball.
I like that, I really like that idea that, there's policing, if you will, that if there are substantiated complaints, that they get addressed. And one of the resolutions for those complaints is, as you recommend, is potentially that we revoke their ability to do that type of business. But I truly think what Rachel said is going to regulate it anyway, because if you don't take care of the property, when people are getting complaints, they don't get rid of it in the future. Just one person.
Well, if I could offer that, it weeds itself out. Airbnb and VRBO, you don't book a property without reading the reviews. And if you're not getting a 5-star review, your property doesn't get promoted anymore. So Airbnb and VRBO will drop you off their list of promoting. So if you're not a super host, if you don't have 5 stars, so it's a matter of, it's evolution, right? You are going to be eliminated from getting bookings, and you're financially not going to be able to afford to continue. So the amount of regulation that you guys, I think, actually need to do on these properties is probably limited, because that's why you're seeing so many go back to long-term, because they're not getting bookings, because their reviews are extremely low, and then those reviews are being read by the next potential tenant, and they're picking a different property. So I just wanted to offer that.
And then we'll have to regulate those long-term rentals, because they're moving the couch back and for you. So,
Is there anyone else that has maybe a question or wants to make a presentation regarding to the subject this evening? Yes, sir.
My name is Clay Smith. I live at 149 Felix Court. And I want to make one statement not to this. This room's cold. I don't know if anybody else feels that. I don't know if you're just trying to.
I'd like to share with you is that we were sold this great bill of goods about this controllable system, and it hasn't worked since, so.
Yeah, I just wanted to go on record, since it was on here, that this room is extremely cold. One way to keep somebody that likes to talk a lot from doing that. And you, Rachel, you did set the bar pretty high, so I don't know if I can surpass you today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm one of the owners of Smith Family Homes. This week, we're 20 years in business. A lot of those we spent here in this community, in the city of Elizabethtown. We built in excess of 150 homes in Hardin, Eaton, LaRue County. We bought a lot of properties in this area. Know the struggles that happened over the last 20 years. And we've even spent time, different times and been through the bad times. Seen a lot of it, know what it's all about. Right now, it's easy to say how great it is to be a builder. There's a lot of times it wasn't great to be a builder, or be an investor, or be the person that had to take care of those houses. A lot of people think you make a lot of money on these, and you don't. You own a $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 rental house, see how much that 1% return really happens. It's difficult. And then when you do, you get the humbling of going into the home and seeing a house that you cared for. You put a lot of money, blood, sweat, and tears, and see somebody destroy it, do $20,000, $30,000 worth of damage, and there's nothing you can do because they have nothing. The proverbial, you can't get blood from a turnip. You can't get it. What are you going to do? And so when everybody's beating up on everybody, the short term or the long term, or this investor, or the developer, or the builder, it's easy to go. I was in a meeting here at the city, like, hey, let's go spend $6 million and buy some land. But it's only $450,000 a year in interest. Pony that up, see what it feels like. It's not good. And then have a delay somewhere. See how it feels really good if you got 6 months. It only costs you $90,000. And so when we're sitting here talking about it, I feel like I'm pretty well versed on everything that could be in this room. And when you're looking at that, it's easy to go, well, we need to have 600 foot. Well, I bought the perfect storm. That is everything that today would be against. I bought a house, and then as I'm there, the opportunity came to buy a house next door that happens to have an accessory dwelling, and they're all freaking out. And it's, what do you do there? And my wife actually really liked the swooped roof of a house, so I had to buy it. I don't even care if anybody's in it. I don't even know if she really wants anybody in the house, to be honest. But I had it. I also have 6 kids. And someday they might want that house. It's a really nice house. And I don't want it destroyed. But I can rent it a little bit. Or if I got a friend in need, I can put them in that house. If I got an accessory dwelling, my son wants to move up there, that's okay. But if I can make a little bit of money on Airbnb, it's not a lot. When I'm doing the math, I haven't had them very long, but they're not making like crazy money. I'd be well ahead to make it 100 other things. But we chose that path. And if you went over and looked at it, you would say, okay, now I kind of get it. There's not a big yard. And that, I didn't build the accessory dwelling as we're going to move forward and call it. But that's where it was. It's been around. And it's been around for a long time. Now, when I go and buy properties, a lot of people don't know this. Because I get beat up on a lot of fronts, so I apologize. I'm going to take a little time and talk about it. But when people say there's not the first-time home buyer house, and where is it? And Marty will go, you know where we're at. For guys like me, because they won't meet the minimum. They can't buy that house. But you know who can? I can. And I can go in and make that house a nice house and make it as affordable as I can make it. And that's what we do. And most of the people in this room, it's what we do. You know, and sometimes, I know it's a sin, I might make a little bit of money. And I know it's horrible, but it lets me go buy the next house, because there's been a lot of them, I don't make money. You know, and it's a crapshoot. You think, hey, you're going to buy it, I don't have to put a lot of money in it. Well, you know what, I'm in the business, over 20 years in this business. I've owned rental houses over 25 years now. So I know a thing or two, and I still get burned. I still have the house that, hey, you think the roof's going to cost $6, it costs $8. And then the driveway needs it. Oh, by the way, the sewer's bad. You know, the drainage is bad. You know, have a long-term rental, have pets in there. Have them not have a vacuum for 4 years. Got paid prompt. Never late on his rent. You know, destroyed the house. Nice house. And it's just very sickening, you know, that they move out of state, you know, and then or they move out, you know, you can't do anything about it. And then it's, you know, you're cleaning up, and then you clean out the ductwork. And then 6 months later, within 6 months, our experience is might as well just put a whole new unit in, because the furnace is not going to make it. And it's nothing like getting a call at like 2 o'clock in the morning on Christmas to hear, hey, I don't have heat, and it's a cold day, and you're trying to take care of your clients. But that's what that's what we do. So when we're thinking about this, as easy it is to say, oh, 600 feet, or like we're using the term illegal. Okay, well, I asked to be legal. I own a business license. You can go look it up, Smith Family Homes. We pay taxes. And trust me, property taxes, I pay a lot in property taxes. And so I know all about it. And then oh, by the way, forget a few. But when you're sitting here going over things, I try to get legal, but it's not on the books. What am I supposed to do? It's not that I'm illegal. It's kind of a gray area, and I'm sure, well, you don't allow it, well, you don't not allow it. So that when I go to the city and go, what do you want me to do? I mean, so that's what I would tell you is. And it's not a simple fix. So when everybody says what's affordable, I don't know. I struggle with it. I really do. As somebody, like I said, with 6 kids, I don't know what to tell them. And I can only do so much. But when you're, and I was on this, set on this to help make this, you know, and I know it's a tough job. And it's easy to, you know, need to make rules. But sometimes they have consequences that you don't really think. And then giving a waiver, that's a slope. Do you really want to go down? I mean, so you give them a waiver, but you don't give me a waiver. That's a lawyer's dream right there, right? I mean, like, what's going on? And I find out who got the waiver. Well, then, do you want to lose a friend, or do you want to be in a lawsuit over it all the time, trying to figure out where the waiver, what defines the waiver? And that would be my 2 cents on this. Thank you.
Any questions, Mr. Smith? Thank you, sir. Anyone else that wishes to come forward and make a comment or statements or presentation, now's your time. Do that.
You're the only one that hasn't spoken.
Well, Todd might be out of town for the next meeting, so I'll be speaking for him.
Okay, that's right. This will continue, so.
Yes. I'll give a speech.
Seeing none, if there's not any other testimony this evening, then at this point, I'm going to close the testimony part of that. And as we've noted earlier, we're not going to be taking any action on this tonight. So I think, Mr. Reverend, we can entertain a motion to continue. Is that correct, what we'll need here?
Yeah, we'd like to continue to a date certain, if you don't mind.
Okay.
At your choice, on April 22nd, we have the St. John Road rezoning, the youth property that's continuing. We have another rezoning on Memorial Court that we don't expect to be controversial. We have a development plan for the Movie Palace, which is a relatively simple, that's kind of the planning commission. Yeah, it's a relatively simple development plan. And then, and then a rezoning for Jimmy Jenkins' sod farm on Henderson. So 3 rezonings and a development plan on April 22nd.
Oh, 3 hearings, we got
Better go to June.
What's the next meeting after that?
May 13th.
We're trying to get Todd here. So we're gonna get Michelle.
Okay, commissioners, you got the dates. I'll entertain a motion to table, but we've got to put a date on there.
I'll make a motion that we table 2025 PCO 7 to the May 13th meeting.
Second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll now call for the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, let the record show the vote was 3-0 to table to May 13th. So we're now going to move on, which our next item is commission members, I think. So thank you all for being here, and we'll probably see you again on the 13th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any commission items?
Good seeing you.
Thank you all.
See you guys.
Director, you have anything to share?
Not today.
Okay. No business here? Marty, first time you've been here for a while, anything to add?
I have a busy schedule. I will say this, that I said,
I know Micah. at the
we're
last-
going to make sure that all the current council people, members get to come and sit. I think it's good for them to understand the planning process, what you all go through. And not just the easy ones, but some of the tough ones, so that they can see, they'll have a greater appreciation, I think, for what our planning department does and the commission as well. So
I know Micah has a greater appreciation.
Micah has a whole new level of appreciation for planning items.
Well, I think, Mr. Riverman, we probably can make that happen, can't we, over the next?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah,
All right, that's good.
I think that's a great
Great idea.
suggestion.
I think it is. Yeah, I think, because this is something we consistently deal with from the council standpoint of approval or not.
Constituents within the community are going to call you.
Right.
And-
Well, and I think this came to light really with the College Street situation where the new people didn't understand because they hadn't been exposed to it. So it was some, they had questions, and being new, sometimes they're hesitant to ask those questions. As I said, Mike, ask away. There are no dumb questions. The only dumb question is one that's not asked.
Well, I think, the council sees the part that we, the due diligence, and are trying to make a decision.
Right.
And are hoping that the staff, that we've done due diligence, and in most cases we have, but it's always good to see how we got there.
Right, right. And I would say this, I compliment the commission and the planning department for putting this stuff online before. I think it is part of that whole transparency. We've always been transparent. This is another step towards that, and I think people saw a change and said, that was part of some of the issues that came up, I guess, when we were dealing with College Street. And people don't it's not important to them until it affects them, and it's in their backyard. And so, again, we're being proactive, and I appreciate the work, because it's not like you all had a bunch of spare time to try to figure out what you were going to do.
Well, there is a learning curve too. If you've never been to one of these hearings,
Yeah.
even we could put that up there and talk
Yeah.
about it. But it's still a learning curve to understand, when can I say something, when can I not, what
Yeah.
should I say? So, I mean, it is a quick learning curve,
Yeah.
and you're not worried about it till you're right, it's in your backyard.
Right, and there's a legal aspect to this. It's not like we're voting to raise sewer rates or not, right, and you can just vote either way. There's a legal lawsuit issue to these actions.
Well, one of the things I've always said, being part of it, is that we have to be very careful and be consistent and set a precedent for what we're doing.
Right.
This is new, we're setting a precedent with what we're doing. So, the point of how do you give a waiver here and there, that's all about what we have to be careful not to do. So, I think we do a good job of it.
Right, and Clay, to Clay's point, that's tough, because you all deal with that every meeting, just about. Whether Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be perfect, it has to be fair.
Yes.
That's the measuring stick
Yes.
we have to employ in
Yes.
everything that we do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Very good. This is a good conversation.
Appreciate y'all's service.
I will entertain I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
so moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Uh,
Aye, we are adjourned. Good job, Joe.
Sorry, Jason, we didn't get to engage you.
No.